Jackie, thank you so much for stopping by today. I know we're here today to talk about something that's really important to both of us. It's not a happy topic, but it's a really important one. And in both of our lines of work, it's something that we deal with families all the time, and especially with women. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and experiences about widowhood, but I'm just going to start with some statistics that you're probably well aware of, and that's how many people it impacts every year. Most surprising to me was the average age that someone becomes a widow. And in different settings, I always do a guessing game and have people guess what it is. And they're always guessing 10 to 20 years higher because the average age is 59. Can you believe that?
It's staggering. And even the statistic in 2022, there was 1 million people that became a surviving spouse, and 88% of them were women. And then couple that with the fact that over 50% of people have not done estate planning. So now you're faced with someone that's still working, probably raising a family, needing income, and they're juggling a lot of different things. And my experience, I have seen firsthand the effect that the grieving process has on individuals. Number one is a mental paralysis, where they cannot focus on information. They can't process that information and act on it. Secondly, what that leads to then is indecision and potentially avoidance altogether because they just cannot deal with what is being thrown at them on top of the responsibilities of what their spouse had that they've lost. So it's a really big factor.
And it's real. And especially in your position with Baird Trust, sometimes the first encounter you have with a client is when you see that woman at the moment she becomes a widow. What are some of those things that women have to deal with at that very moment and in those first kind of several months that are sometimes really surprising at a time when they're the most vulnerable and still going through that grieving process, and yet they have to deal with all these really important matters and even make some decisions at that time?
Yes, I think that's where we forget that they're in a vulnerable, sensitive state, but they're forced to do things when they're not really prepared to. For example, final matters, the funeral, collecting life insurance, there's still bills to pay, there's home maintenance, so we still have to take care of the property that you live in. But a couple of the really big things that happen that I think are shocking for women is the fact that, as we talked about age 59 being the average age of a widow, that they're working and now they've lost 50% of their income with their spouse. If they're over the 59 age group, they might be losing Social Security, pension, things of that nature.
Okay, we've talked enough about all the bad things and things that go wrong and what that's like, but let's talk about the really important work that you do and that so many of our teams do, and that's how do we prepare all of our clients for any eventuality, especially one that's fairly likely, which is that women will become a widow at some point in their life. So if someone's done nothing today, where do you start?
Well, I think it's great to involve both spouses instead of waiting until there's one. So pre-planning prior to anything negative happening, but also to unify the couple, to talk about what is important to us. What do we want to have happen? Who do we want to have take care of our children? Are we interested in giving money to charities? So there's a lot of things that spouses need to just reflect and talk about to make sure that they're both on the same page. Or if they're not on the same page, how do we compromise and make sure that everybody's interests and goals and objectives are achievable?
I think that's a great point. And I'm sure we've both been in meetings where you have both spouses there and you're starting to work maybe on an estate plan and you ask them one of those questions and you see them look at each other and we know at that moment they've never talked about this before. Exactly. And so one of the things that I've seen several of our advisors do is like, okay, we're stopping this meeting right here. We're going to give you some homework. You all need to go off by yourself and talk about these things, make some unified decisions, and then come back in and we can help you. Anything that can be discussed, pre-planned, and communicated with your whole family, that will take a huge burden off that widow as well. So it's not just financial issues, it's other topics as well.
Well, and another thing to consider, something that money can't buy, and that's life planning. That's the practicalities that happen when you lose a spouse, and you can pre-plan for that. So we're talking about the gap that's left when a spouse is no longer around. And we know in our lives as couples, we divide and conquer activities of daily living. We each take our own responsibilities. And that is where I found there's a lot of gap, and it creates additional stress on the surviving spouse. And so looking at life planning to find out, where do I feel vulnerable? Where would I be concerned if my spouse isn't living today? What do I need to do to make myself feel better and pre-plan for that? And that's what I've done in some of my journey as well. I've done the financial plan. I've done the estate plan. I know where everything is. But my vulnerability would be home maintenance. Yeah. And so I thought, practice what you preach. And I even found myself finding ways not to deal with it. Avoidance was part of what was going on here somehow, but I pushed through it. And I even have my own little black book that I put all of my home maintenance information in. So it's easy to do. You just have to make the time and commit to yourself.
Couldn't agree more. In the work that I do in Baird Family Wealth, most often we're dealing with business owners. And that's a whole separate set of issues that come if one spouse or the other or both own a business. There's been just some really kind of nightmare stories that have come from the lack of planning or having conversations about that. So we spend a lot of our time talking to couples about what the impact on that business would be, both on their eventual succession planning, retirement, and what happens afterwards. But in the event something unforeseen happens and that age 59, statistic becomes a reality, is there a buy-sell agreement? What's the contingency plan? Could this business continue without our client involved in it? So many things that have to be planned with regard to that business that can be a whole topic kind of in and of itself, but a conversation that needs to be had.
Yes, and that can take more than any of the rest of it as far as execution. So after they have figured that out and unified on what it is that they want to do going forward, then it's a great time to include a financial plan where let's look at what are our assets, where are they, and projecting where they will be at end of plan. And then being able to provide the what ifs, because we know that life is going to throw us curveballs. And what can we do to anticipate the potential of that happening? So that can include income planning, obviously retirement planning, and also long-term care planning, all within that financial plan.
A lot of couples certainly will only go through usually becoming a widow once. It's something that we experience with family, and we're happy to bring that experience to bear so that we can make it easier for them, help them through the planning process. And we do have a lot of those checklists and things. So, we invite all of the clients that we work with and to open the dialogue with us.
Yes, I think that's great. And I think families committing to this process will give you some of the hard questions. We'll make sure you're doing certain things. Allow us to do so. So that's where the motivation comes. You're not alone. Let us help you, but you have to make the first move. Yeah. So allow us to do our job to help you.
And we haven't talked about it, but I just got to tell you how much I appreciate you taking care of my mom when my father passed away 5 years ago. And it's not that I couldn't do it, because certainly it's what I do every day too, but you being there and serving that role really let me sit on the same side of the table with my mom and my brother and sister, instead of, oh, I'm kind of in charge and leading this. It let me be part of the family.
Well, it's a passion of mine, and being in the business as long as I have, it's important to me to take care of people when they're at their vulnerable state. And being a surviving spouse, which I have helped a number of people through that role, it's really important. It's not all about the money. It's about that mental stability where they need it so that they can grieve and do what they need to do to mourn their loved one and to surround themselves with their family, instead of worrying about all these other things. And that's what we want women to prepare to do, is to take care of themselves now. Just carve out a little time now so that it's going to pay you dividends 10 times over when you really need it the most.
Couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I always appreciate your experience so much, and really just the passion you have for the families that you work with and how we can help them prepare for all that life has in store for them.
Thanks, Jaleigh. Appreciate it.